Ford was not supposed to build this car again. That is the sentence that keeps circulating inside enthusiast forums and closed-door supplier meetings, because for years the official position was simple. The GT chapter had closed, the limited run was finished, and the nameplate would rest as a perfect memory rather than risk a second act that could tarnish it. Then something changed. I am Marcus with the car culture, where we spend our time looking past press releases to understand what a car actually means to the people who will spend their savings and their weekends chasing it. And what changed inside Ford's performance division is exactly the kind of story worth sitting with. Because buried in the engineering brief for this next generation, GT40, is a decision that several senior powertrain engineers reportedly fought against internally. A choice that breaks from what everyone assumed this car would become. And we are going to get to exactly what that decision was. Standing in front of it, the first thing you notice is restraint. Not timidity, restraint. The proportions have been pulled tighter at the hips. The greenhouse pushed lower over a cabin that sits nearly at your knee height and the flying buttresses behind the doors. That signature architecture that made the original modern GT unmistakable on any street in the world have been reworked into something that looks less like a design flourish and more like a wind tunnel demand that happened to end up beautiful. The nose carries less overt aggression than you would expect from a car-chasing modern supercar theater. Instead, it communicates precision, the same way a scalpel communicates precision instead of a chainsaw. That restraint is not an accident. It is Ford telling you, this car understands exactly what it is and does not need to shout about it. The surfacing along the doors channels air with an almost surgical intent, guiding it around the cabin and feeding it directly into the engine bay through channels that sit low enough to stay out of the way of your eye until you deliberately look for them. The rear deck sits low and wide, anchored by an active wing that Ford engineers describe internally as working in concert with the underbody rather than against it, meaning the car generates meaningful downforce without relying on a single oversized visual statement bolted to the trunk. Every line on this body is doing a job. None of them exist purely to be photographed, and that is precisely why they photograph so well. Open the door and it does not simply swing outward. It lifts in that dihedral motion the GT nameplate has carried since its revival, rotating up and slightly forward, clearing the low sill so you can drop into the seat rather than fold yourself into it. The cabin greets you with the scent of warmed leather and a faint trace of carbon resin, materials that have not been dressed up to feel expensive, but simply are expensive, chosen because they perform a function first and look extraordinary as a byproduct. The seating position is fixed low and reclined, part of the architecture rather than an adjustment, which forces your body into the exact geometry the engineers intended, rather than letting you compromise it. The steering wheel is small in diameter and thick in your palms, hexagonal in shape, dense with function but never cluttered, every switch falling under a finger without requiring your eyes to leave the road ahead. Cabin silence at rest is deliberate rather than accidental, achieved through acoustic layering in the carbon tub itself, rather than added insulation weight, which means Ford engineered quiet into the structure instead of bolting it on afterward. The digital instrument cluster sits close to your eye line, integrated into the dash rather than perched on top of it, displaying only what you need in the moment you need it. There is no sense of being surrounded by luxury for its own sake. There is only the sense of being placed correctly inside a machine that was designed around the driver first, and every comfort consideration second. Reach for the ignition and the car does not erupt. It clears its throat first. A low mechanical cough as fuel pressure builds, then settles into an idle that sits somewhere between a threat and a promise. A persistent low-frequency rumble that you feel in the base of your spine before you consciously register it as sound. This GT40 carries a twin turbocharged V8, displacing a bit under 4 liters, an evolution of the same EcoBoost architecture that powered the outgoing car but pushed further, targeting somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 horsepower in its most aggressive configuration. That number matters less than what it feels like delivered through the pedal. Throttle response is immediate but not violent at low speeds. Then it builds with an urgency that feels genuinely race-derived as the turbos spool fully into boost. the exhaust note sharpening from a rumble into something closer to a shriek at the top of the rev range. Layered with turbo whistle and the mechanical clatter of a dry sump system working exactly as hard as it should. Upshifts through the 7-speed dual clutch arrive with a percussive snap you feel through the seat, rather than merely hear each gear change landing like a small event rather than a formality. Here is that engineering decision I mentioned. Ford's team debated internally whether to move toward a naturally aspirated architecture, to chase a purer, high RPM emotional signature, the kind exotic V10s and V12s are known for, but ultimately committed to keeping this platform turbocharged, betting that real-world drivability and a genuine motorsport lineage tracing back to Le Mans mattered more than chasing a sound profile borrowed from someone else's playbook. It is a controversial call among purists who wanted an atmospheric engine, and it is the kind of decision that will be argued about in comment sections for years, which is exactly the point. The first moments of actual motion tell you everything the specification sheet cannot. Steering weight builds naturally as speed increases, communicating road texture through the wheel rim with a clarity that feels almost old-fashioned in the best possible sense. Nothing filtered, nothing artificially weighted to feel sportier than it is. Brake pedal feedback is firm from the very top of travel. Carbon ceramic rotors biting with a confidence that never feels grabby or nervous. The suspension, an active setup borrowed in spirit from the car's racing program, communicates the road surface without punishing your spine over it, softening just enough over broken pavement while staying flat and composed the instant you commit to a corner. Chassis balance feels mid-engine honest, the rear end willing to rotate under trail braking but never threatening to surprise you, a car that rewards precision rather than punishing hesitation. Ford is targeting a price in the region of $600,000 for the most complete configuration, which sounds enormous until you consider what buyers are actually paying for. They are not paying for a number on a specification sheet. They are paying to own a physical continuation of a story that began at Le Mans in the 1960s, a story about an American company that decided it would not lose to Ferrari and then did not. Resurrected once already in the 21st century, and now resurrected again for a generation that has never seen it in showrooms. That is not something you can put a fair market value on, and that is exactly why buyers will pay it anyway. This is not a segment disruptor chasing lap time supremacy. It is a legacy revival that understands its own history well enough to evolve without betraying it. Positioned somewhere between modern American muscle and exotic grand touring, occupying space almost nobody else on the market currently claims. The person this car was built for is not defined by their bank balance. They are defined by a relationship with driving itself. Someone who reads about Le Mans history for pleasure, who understands why a turbocharged V8 with motorsport lineage matters more than a naturally aspirated engine borrowed from someone else's playbook, who wants a car that rewards a skilled hand rather than simply flattering an unskilled one. It is not without compromise. Rear visibility remains genuinely poor by any modern standard, a byproduct of that low, buttressed roofline the design refuses to sacrifice. And cargo space is close to non-existent, forcing owners to accept that this car exists for driving, and very little else. Ford has not hidden from that. They built the car anyway. Picture this GT40 at 4 in the morning. On an empty stretch of American two-lane highway, headlights carving through darkness with nothing ahead but road, and the sound of that turbocharged V8 working exactly as it was built to work. That is where this car finds its truth. Before we close, here is something worth arguing about honestly. Should Ford have chased a naturally aspirated engine to compete emotionally with Italian exotics? Or was staying true to its turbocharged Le Mans identity the right call? There is no clean answer, and I would genuinely like to hear where you land in the comments. If stories like this one matter to you, the car culture is where we keep telling them. This is not a supercar pretending to have a racing pedigree. This is a racing pedigree that happens to be street legal.